Aloha kako. The title of my final research paper is The Last Kanaka, a mo'olelo of Forced Identity, Removal, Division, Eradication, and Genocide, which was also the title of my free write. It's subject to change, but for now it's applicable with current findings in my research. My objective will be to use the intersectionality of race, gender, class, language, and culture, and the subordination and elimination of the native. My paper will attempt to connect the dispossession of land, forced removal, blood quantum, land privatization, attempts which did not find their creation and origins here in Ko Hawaii Pai Aina, but as far away as Turtle Island and even Ireland by the English, as well as policies like the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920, all of which rely on the extermination of our people and total deprivation of ancestral memory. To underscore the point of collision between Hawaiian understandings of authenticity and survivance, and Western colonial notions of race aimed at the killing of the native to ensure the invasive colonial state's survival. This will be attempted using my ancestors' experiences and realities as they relate to the aforementioned severance and forced removal. I'm going to go through a brief timeline of events to show the mo'oku how these mechanisms of colonialism were perfected before reaching our shores. But first, to begin, I'd like to introduce the main sentiment among our haole counterparts during the 19th century, and indeed, the sentiment from first contact with disease-ridden European enslavers and murderers. Pictured here is William Tecumseh Sherman. He wrote a letter to Ulysses S. Grant in 1866, which read, begin quote, "We must act with vindictive earnestness against the Sioux, even to their extermination, men, women, and children." Now, despite his Shawnee middle name, William Sherman was not of indigenous descent. It was a theft of the Shawnee Ali'i's name by William's father. In fact, the warrior chief Tecumseh encouraged resistance to U.S. expansion throughout native Turtle Island. These are the land ordinances of 1785 and 1787, which were created to ultimately remove native presence. In fact, land speculation in the 1740s allowed European settlers to acquire indigenous lands. So land acquisition and indigenous removal occurred even before these land ordinances were enacted. And it's what they considered undeveloped land. And they later resold it for a profit. And as we all know, privatization of land is a chief tenet of capitalism, which found its way here to our ancestral home. And just to fast kind highlight the views our American counterparts had of Kanaka Oiwi, just 3 years after the 1787 Northwest Land Ordinance occurred the Olovalu Massacre on Maui. And as we move along this very brief timeline, we can fast forward to the year 1848. And in California, the coming of the 49er gold raid invasion saw the genocide and attempted extermination of our California native relatives and the theft of their aina and resources. So no surprise, this brings me to the mahele and the experiences of my kupuna, specifically my kupuna kuakolu, kualua, and kuakahi. Here are two pictures, one of the Land Commission Award 3072, Kaya Lii-Namuliwai, the latter my kupuna kuakolu, and Royal Patent 1074. In the words of my kupuna kualua, Kawaipio Namuliwai, during an interview that was conducted in Maka'olelo, Hawaii, begin quote, "I have never left the islands. I've always lived at the place of my parents in Waianae," end quote. This is the beginning of the research of our forced removal from and deprivation of aina, because it begins with our ancestral connections as clear descendants of our place in space, which ultimately threatens the very existence of the fake colonial state. We're going to jump forward to the year 1980. Here's the legal notice of eminent domain and condemnation, which was posted in the Honolulu Star-Advertiser on July 24th of that same year. The fake state of Hawaii claimed it needed this particular apana, which was part of Land Commission Award 3072 and Royal Patent 1074 for public use and public good, which was to extend part of Farrington Highway. However, this did not occur. In fact, upon my ohana's receipt and acknowledgement of this notice, the fake state terminated the case and later condemned the land, offering neither fair compensation nor the application of rightful title to land granted for perpetual stewardship. It was later sold to Okimoto Corp., which owns Waianae Store. Basically, Waianae Store is on our land. So to the left is my kupuna kuakahi, and to the right is my kupuna kualua, Kawaipio Namuliwai. The puke in the middle contains 28 oral histories from the kupuna of Waianae, which was part of a project to uplift the voices and histories of, begin quote, a people that have been often overlooked by history texts, end quote. My great-grandfather is one of those elders who had been asked to lend our family's mo'olelo. And on page 16, he talks about land granted to my great-great-grandmother. I'll just read some of my grandfather's words. Begin quote. Going up Waianae Valley Road is a section where there are a lot of mango trees. This section was called Wailele, and this is where I was born on August 20th, 1900. My mother was Lii-Namuliwai, and she once owned some property named Muliwai on the island of Hawaii, close to the Parker Ranch, which was gotten through a grant from the Ali'i. There was 11 of us children in our family, all of us born in Waianae. Grandpa Muliwai had given my mama 2 pieces of property in Waianae that he received from the Ali'i. One property was next to the Okimoto store on the highway, and the other one here in the valley, end quote. Interesting is the fact that in the beginning of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act hearing in 1920, Mr. Robertson, who represents Parker Ranch, explains that the interests of his client and some 500,000 acres would be severely affected by the passing of this bill. And I'm kind of still currently searching through documents and records to find the award for this particular aina. So here I'm kind of jumping back in time because I haven't really put this into the timeline where I can connect it to see where these intersect and overlap. I'm getting there, but the research is still in the works. But the General Allotment Act of 1887 kind of saw that first measurement of blood to determine competency and entitlements, right? And interestingly, while the native needed to prove a high fraction of blood, our Popolo relatives were suffering the imposed racialization of the one-drop rule, which kept them subordinated and enslaved as property of white plantation elites. And as an outcome and consequence of such racial classifications, Indigenous and Popolo alike suffer systemically at the hands of the colonial state to the advantage of Haole.